Religious leaders in France call for more security in places of worship after the killing of a Catholic priest. One of the killers, 19-year-old Adel Kermiche, was tagged and on probation at the time after twice trying to go to Syria. Tributes to Father Jacques Hamel, murdered in an ordinary Catholic church in a suburb of Rouen. President Hollande is under severe pressure after a spate of attacks. He convened his security and defence advisers this morning. With Pope Francis due to arrive in Poland and speak out about this latest atrocity, we'll be live with our correspondents in Paris and Krakow. Also this lunchtime, the UK's economy grew faster than expected in the run-up to the EU referendum. The glass ceiling is smashed. Hillary Clinton becomes the first woman ever to be nominated by a main party to run for president. Spending on overtime in the NHS, one consultant earned £375,000 more than their salary. And the private works of a public man, oil paintings by Sir Winston Churchill, are to be auctioned later today.
Here in the south, nothing was as bad as my time at Deep Cut. A former soldier speaks out about life inside the Surrey Army barracks. And punched, threatened and spat at the Southern Rail staff caught up in the centre of a bitter dispute.
Good afternoon, welcome to the BBC News at 1. The President of France, François Hollande, has met religious leaders for talks after a Catholic priest was murdered yesterday at his church in Normandy. One of the jihadists who stabbed Father Jacques Hamel was on probation and wore an electronic tag which was turned off every morning for several hours. 19-year-old Adel Kermiche had twice previously tried to join the so-called Islamic State group in Syria. Adam Fleming reports now from Rouen.
He married them, buried their relatives and christened them. People here are remembering Father Jacques Hamel, murdered with a knife to the neck. Little Marie-Hélène told me he helped her to prepare for her first communion.
J'ai fait mon caté avec.
I'm so upset, she said. This man keeps the keys for the church and worked with Father Hamel. He called him incomparable. And that was all. As this community pays tribute to its much-loved local priest with an ever-growing collection of flowers, notes and candles, the government in Paris is grappling with two huge issues: religion and security. This morning, the French President François Hollande met the country's faith leaders. The message: this wasn't just an attack on the Catholic Church, but an assault on all of France.
Contraire à tout l'enseignement.
It is an act which is alien to the teachings of our religion. This act is alien to Islam, an act that all Muslims of France denounce and reject strongly.
Then it was a meeting of his security cabinet.
D'abord, comme l'a indiqué le ministre de la Défense, à l'instant, la portée à 10 000.
There are currently 10,000 military personnel working within Operation Sentinel, and we have also decided to boost the numbers of the operational reserve of the gendarmerie.
This is one of the attackers, a young man born in France of Algerian descent. His name is Adel Kermiche. He's just 19 years old, and the authorities knew him. He was on a terror watch list. He made 2 failed attempts to reach Syria, and he was released from prison in March with an electronic tag. But he was unsupervised between 8:30 and 12:30 when the attack happened yesterday morning. His mother said last year the Charlie Hebdo killings acted as a detonator. He said that one couldn't exercise their religion peacefully in France. He was under a spell, like a cult. Fortunately, we managed to catch him in time twice. If he had made it to Syria, I would have written off my son. I want to know who messed up my kid. Police have raided his mother's house.
He was saying that we should go over to Syria and fight for our brothers. We said that was not good, and he replied that France is the land of unbelievers, that we should not live here. He tried to indoctrinate us.
In the cafe, everyone is desperate to find out more. The headline says simply, martyred. This is the sort of news this town, this country, is having to get used to. Adam Fleming, BBC News, Saint-Étienne de Rouvray.
Well, let's talk now to Andrew Plant, our correspondent in Paris. And Andrew, the pressure on the government keeps growing.
Rita, there are certainly big question marks among the French public over the way the French government has handled security here. After the meeting of religious leaders this morning, there was then a meeting of the Security Council here, which is representatives from the government, but also from police and the army too. They come out with some fairly concrete ideas a couple of hours ago. They were talking about having 56 events over this summer that they had to ensure were secure so that they could go ahead and using extra troops to do that. So after the Bastille Day attack here 12 days ago, they talked about drafting in 10,000 extra reservist troops. They're now talking about using an extra 2,500 volunteers. So one approach to security here is just to get more security on the streets. There are already a lot of troops stationed around Paris and Nice at the moment as well. But there will be questions as well about internal monitoring, because as we now know, at least one of these attackers was well known to police. He had tried to travel to Syria twice last year. He got caught once in Germany and then caught once again in Turkey. On the second occasion he was imprisoned and then fitted with that electronic tag. So he was being monitored. His parents had even talked to security advisors about what they suspected of his radical beliefs. Nevertheless, he was able to slip out yesterday morning and perform that attack. So lots of questions here, both about security and about how people who are already known to forces here are monitored anyway.
OK, Andrew, thanks very much. Well, Pope Francis is expected to make his first public comments about the murder of the Catholic priest in Poland this afternoon. Our correspondent Tom Burridge is in Krakow for us now. And Tom, the mood in anticipation of this speech by Pope Francis must be very sombre.
I think there is some sort of sombre mood here in Krakow, Rita, but actually World Youth Day is a huge celebration, and chatting to pilgrims from Britain, from Australia, from California this morning, that sense of celebration remains. Now, the Pope, of course, will arrive here in approximately 2 hours into Krakow. Later this afternoon, he'll give a mass and his first public address since the killing of Father Jacques Hamel in northern France yesterday in the castle complex behind me. And I think not only will he pay his respects to the priest, but also, I think, address that wider issue of extremist Islamist ideology, how we can manage our emotions in the face of such violence and manage our fears. And I think, you know, the Pope does have some big differences with the authorities here in Poland, the right-wing government in Warsaw, on issues such as immigration. But I think when it comes to the latest or the recent spate of terror attacks, I think we'll get a sense of unity, of solidarity and a very nuanced, sensible approach from the Pope.
Tom, thank you. Tom Burridge there. At least 40 people have been killed and more than 100 injured in a huge explosion in Syria. Reports say that a truck and motorbike exploded in the predominantly Kurdish town of Qamishli in the northeast of Syria. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility. Britain's economy grew by 0.6% in the 3 months leading up to the vote to leave the European Union. Figures from the Office for National Statistics show output was 2.2% higher than at the same time the previous year. The economy was boosted by the biggest increase in industrial production since 1999. Simon Gompertz reports.
Leather from South America. It shows how the impact of Brexit on your business depends on exactly what you're doing or selling. This importer was faring well before the vote, as today's figures show for the economy as a whole. But now they're worried.
Everything we buy is in dollars from South America. This means there's an immediate effect if the pound is very weak. So everything, since the night of Brexit, is costing us 14% more. So this has an immediate effect on our costs.
Contrast that with the huge pharmaceutical manufacturer GSK, maker of Zantac, Night Nurse and Panadol, which issued warnings about Brexit before the referendum, but today said it was going ahead with £275 million of investment in new manufacturing facilities.
My guess is that we're probably going to see some choppy signals in the next 6 or 9 months. I don't think we're going to see a dramatic shift to the left or the right, but we will see some choppiness. We're going to see some things which are indicative of a bit of a slowdown, and it's likely that we're going to see some signals of early inflation.
A big jump in pharmaceutical production, along with cars, in the 3 months to June, led to a 1.8% increase in manufacturing. Hotels and restaurants were up 1.1%. Construction had another tricky period, down 0.4%. all feeding into that 0.6% rise in national output or GDP in the run-up to the vote for Brexit.
Well, the data suggests that the economy was performing well ahead of the referendum vote. What we've seen since the Brexit vote is quite a significant slowdown in business sentiment, in consumer sentiment, and this will have an impact on the economy over the coming months.
The house building company Taylor Wimpey said today it's had plenty of visitors to its sites in recent weeks, reassuring news for the government.
The UK economy is fundamentally strong as we go into the challenge that we face ahead. That gives us the tools and the scope to respond as the economy requires.
Will the currency effect give a lift to UK holiday companies? The drop in the pound prompting families to stay at home for the summer. Butlins just announced its bookings are robust, but it'll be a while before we can judge how all these factors play out. Simon Gompertz, BBC News.
Let's talk to Kamal Ahmed, our economics editor. And Kamal, growth is stronger than expected, as we saw there. There's been some major business investment announced, but there are still warnings of possible trouble ahead.
Yes, absolutely. I think there are two big points about today's figures. Firstly, we are looking to an extent in the rear view mirror. All this data that's come out is really from April and May, when business confidence was quite a good deal higher. That doesn't mean that it's not still good news. Confidence is very important in an economy, and if data is strong, that tends to breed confidence. And also, we've seen good manufacturing figures, which are part of the driver of the UK economy, and exports will be helped by the fall in sterling. But certainly very senior economists I've been speaking to who are advising the government suggest that if we look at the here and now, not in the rearview mirror, that the data at the moment is quite poor, and that the public should not be lulled into a false sense of security. Yes, the announcement by GSK is a good one. The announcement that there's going to be an expansion of City Airport in London is a good one, but there are still some poor figures ahead, and we won't really know what the economy looks like probably for another 2 to 3 months post the referendum decision.
OK, Kamal, thank you. Hillary Clinton has become the first woman in US history to be nominated for president by any major party. She was endorsed by the Democrats at their national convention in Philadelphia. Former President Bill Clinton set out the case for why his wife should lead the nation. Kim Khattas reports.
This was a night of electrifying moments and powerful emotions. State delegates casting their votes in the roll call.
Georgia Democrats are proud to cast 29 votes for Senator Bernie Sanders and 87 votes for the next President of the United States, Secretary Hillary Clinton.
Official business became deeply personal for many, and then finally there was unity.
And I move that Hillary Clinton be selected as the nominee of the Democratic Party for President of the United States.
Senator Sanders has moved in the spirit of unity to suspend the rules and nominate Hillary Clinton by acclamation as the presidential candidate of the Democratic Party. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Hillary is uniquely qualified to seize the opportunities and reduce the risk we face. And she is still the best darn change maker I have ever known.
The energy and enthusiasm here tonight are a huge relief to Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party. It took a lot of work to get here, but this is the show of unity they were hoping for.
I can't believe we just put the biggest crack in that glass ceiling yet. Thanks to you and to everyone who's fought so hard to make this possible.
The convention continues, but Mrs. Clinton is ready for the battle for the White House. Kim Khattas, BBC News, Philadelphia.
Let's go back to Philadelphia and to Nick Bryant, who's there for us now. Nick, the convention hasn't been quite the display of unity that Mrs. Clinton would have wanted, but are they all going to rally round her now?
Rita, last night we saw this intricately choreographed gesture of unity as Bernie Sanders stood before the convention and called for her nomination by acclamation. The problem was, at that very moment, hundreds of his delegates actually marched out of the hall. But last night there were far more cheers for Hillary Clinton than boos. The mood on day 2 was very different on the mood of day 1. There wasn't the same spirit of rebellion or raucousness. And I think many of Hillary Clinton's critics actually deferred to the history of the moment. We're in Philadelphia. It's the cradle of American liberty. It was the gathering place of America's founding fathers. It's where they drafted the US Constitution. And last night the page was turned on another chapter in the American story. Often we talk about the great milestone moments of the struggle for black equality, the civil rights reforms of the 1960s. We don't talk so much about the milestone moments of the struggle for gender equality. Well, last night we saw one, and it was a big one. This female first is truly historic.
Nick, thank you very much. Nick Bryant there. Police in Pakistan, in the Pakistan province of Punjab, have confirmed that they've launched a murder investigation following the death of a woman from Bradford. No arrests have been made, but Samia Shahid's father is under investigation, and they also want to interview her first husband. Well, our correspondent Nick Beek is in Manningham for us now. And Nick, there are clearly many questions surrounding the death of this young woman in Pakistan.
Yes, Rita, this is a significant development in what's becoming an increasingly mysterious and murky story. At its heart is the accusation that a young woman from here in Bradford has become the victim of a so-called honour killing in Pakistan. The police there say this is now a murder investigation and that Samia Shahid's father is the chief suspect. Her first husband is also wanted for questioning, but he is now on the run. How have the authorities drawn this conclusion? Well, they say they've been speaking to her second husband. He is convinced that she was killed by family members when she went to Pakistan, apparently to visit sick relatives. He said that previously she had received death threats. Meanwhile, people here in Bradford have described her as a lovely, bubbly person. And another development from locally, is that a 32-year-old woman who is also a relative of Samia Shahid has been arrested on suspicion of threatening the local MP. She had vowed to get to the bottom of what happened. She says that she will do all that she can to expose the truth, but now we hear that a 32-year-old woman is being questioned by West Yorkshire Police. Rita.
Thank you, Nick. The time is 17 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. One of the men who killed a Catholic priest was tagged and on probation after twice trying to go to Syria. Tributes are paid to Father Jacques Hamel, murdered in an ordinary Catholic church in a suburb of Rouen.
And in South today at 1:30, punched, threatened and spat at the Southern Rail staff caught up in the centre of a bitter dispute. And what now for Portsmouth as the city's dedicated minister is scrapped by the government. Join me here on BBC One after the national news.
Now, the overtime bill for hospital consultants has risen by more than a third in the past 2 years. A BBC investigation has found that one doctor earned an extra £375,000 over 12 months. Here's our health correspondent, Dominic Hughes.
I want you to look straight ahead, ignore the light, and I just won't go through.
A specialised eye examination underway in Wigan. Here, they've changed the way they work, saving money that was paid to consultants to do extra shifts. So instead of a doctor, an expert nurse now sees many of the patients. That keeps the hospital's finances under control and frees up consultants to treat the really complex cases.
Very good. That's fine, thank you.
The main benefit is that we as an organisation have less financial pressure because we're not having to pay out these premium pay rates. By working together, we can solve some pretty tricky problems. And, you know, the bottom line is it's the patients who benefit.
But many other hospitals are facing a rising bill for consultant payments. Across the UK, extra overtime cost £168 million last year. That's an increase of a third in 2 years. One doctor made nearly £375,000 in 12 months at a trust where a shortage of consultants means a heavy workload.
There's too much demand and there aren't enough consultants. So what you're trying to do is to ask a workforce that's already stretched to and sometimes beyond its limit to do even more. It's simply an effect of too much demand, too few consultants.
Specialist nurses like Ewan now carry out procedures that once were performed by consultants. That's better for patients because they can get to see Ewan a lot more frequently, and it saves the hospital an awful lot of money. But each hospital trust can make its own arrangements on how it pays consultants for extra work. The body that represents NHS employers says there needs to be more continuity.
What we're very much hoping to achieve is a new standardised national approach that trusts can then apply locally. That's not to say there may not be local arrangements in particular circumstances, but I think they will become less common.
And I'll just line you up.
The changes put in place at Wigan demonstrate it is possible to cut down on expensive overtime payments. But NHS managers in England hope negotiations on a new contract for consultants will help end excessive wage bills. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Wigan.
The Labour leadership candidate Owen Smith has set out plans to strengthen workers' rights and trade union powers. In a speech in South Yorkshire, he called for a fairer tax system, the abolition of zero-hours contracts and the end to private provision in the NHS in England. Our political correspondent Carol Walker reports.
This was a speech of ambitious rhetoric and a far-reaching slate of new policies. Owen Smith promised to smash austerity, raise taxes on high earners and spend more on the NHS. He promised to overhaul workers' rights.
Our country is rapidly becoming the sick man of Europe when it comes to workers' rights. And I've had enough of it. I think it is time for us to make us once more the envy of Europe, indeed the envy of the world when it comes to workers' rights.
It's decades since the Tory governments of Margaret Thatcher and John Major abolished most wages councils, which set levels of pay in many sectors. Owen Smith promised to reintroduce them, to scrap the public sector pay freeze and end the gender pay gap. Other key pledges include a new Ministry of Labour, getting rid of the Department for Work and Pensions, minimum guaranteed working hours, outlawing zero-hours contracts, and scrapping many of the curbs on trade unions. He promised to increase spending on the NHS by 4% in real terms every year of the next Parliament, paid for by reinstating the 50p top rate of tax and a new wealth tax on investment earnings. By setting out a raft of policies, Owen Smith will be hoping to strike a more positive tone. It's also clearly a left-wing agenda, a pitch that could appeal to some of Jeremy Corbyn's supporters. Jeremy Corbyn and his shadow Chancellor John McDonnell have already promised to borrow more for a £500 billion investment programme and announced measures to improve workers' rights. But the challenger to the Labour leader said most people were not aware of their policies.
We've been a weak opposition over the last 9 months. John and Jeremy, for all their good intentions, have been weak. And worse than being a weak opposition, we haven't laid out, I think, in anything like the detail, a credible prospectus for government.
Owen Smith faces a huge challenge, but he'll be hoping his radical policy agenda might help him to woo ordinary Labour members concerned about the internal rows which have dogged Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. Carol Walker, BBC News.
Let's go to Chris Mason, who was at the speech in Orgreave. And Chris, lots of policy there, but does Owen Smith think this is enough for him to win?
Yes, Rita, this was a pitch absolutely groaning with new policy in an area groaning with symbolism. This is now a high-tech manufacturing site, a home to Boeing and Rolls-Royce, amongst others. It was in 1984 the site of those running battles between the police and the miners. Owen Smith's pitch is to say that he is the man full of new ideas, and crucially, he says he is competent, and he contrasts that with what he sees as the incompetence of Jeremy Corbyn. But he knows he's the underdog. He knows he has a mountain to climb, and that is because Jeremy Corbyn won by 1 million miles less than a year ago. There was another bit of symbolism here today, Rita. In that room, in that auditorium where we heard the speech from Owen Smith, there was around about 100 supporters. When Jeremy Corbyn gathers for his speeches, he absolutely packs them out with it's teeming with loads of people who are absolutely determined to ensure that he wins. That is an insight into the challenge that Owen Smith faces over the summer campaign.
Chris, many thanks. Chris Mason there. A group of MPs has warned the government that there could be a spike in immigration to the UK in the run-up to Britain leaving the EU. The Home Affairs Committee report also urged the government to set a cut-off date for when EU nationals already living in the UK would be granted the right to stay. Well, our Home Affairs correspondent Danny Shaw is here with me now. And Danny, we know that Theresa May has said Brexit means Brexit, but we don't yet know anything about the terms of any sort of deal. So why is the committee talking about this now?
I think the committee is concerned that in the past, when there have been immigration rule changes that have toughened the laws on immigration, they have seen an influx of people coming into the UK to try to get ahead of those immigration rule changes. And they're worried that the same thing is going to happen with Brexit. So what they're saying is, first of all, there needs to be a clear cut-off date set. And after that date, the new rules will come into effect. Before that date, you'll have the existing rules, which essentially allow EU nationals to live and work freely in the UK. The other situation they're concerned about is the lack of certainty for EU citizens already in Britain. At the moment, if they've been here for 5 years or more, they're allowed to stay permanently. It seems as though that is going to be the situation even after Brexit, but they are still urging the government to say that, to guarantee that. Government's position is they're not going to enter into negotiations committed to that because they want the rights of Britons living in other EU member states to be guaranteed as well. So it's a bit of an impasse at the moment.
OK, Danny, thank you. Norfolk police have released images of the suspects involved in the attempted abduction of a serviceman at RAF Marham last week, one of whom may have suffered a visible facial injury. 2 men attempted to grab the serviceman while he was jogging near the base. Well, Robert Hall is in Marham for us now. Robert.
Rita, there'll be new police activity on the roads in and around Marham this afternoon as uniformed officers and detectives gather more fragments of information which will enable them to piece together what they still believe was an attempted abduction. In a minute, a little bit more about what they've revealed in the past half hour. But first, here's a reminder of what happened last week. In the communities near RAF Marham, more questions than answers swirl around last week's security alert. It was sparked when a dark-coloured people carrier approached a young serviceman who was jogging near the base. He told police that he'd head-butted a man who tried to grab him, knocking him to the ground. When a second assailant, carrying a knife, jumped out of the vehicle, the serviceman ran off. Norfolk police have just released 2 e-fit pictures of the men they're hunting. They've previously been described as of Middle Eastern origin, one bearded, the other clean-shaven.
What I've been really keen to do is to work with the victim of this offence to get as much information as possible so that what I'm putting out today, I believe, is a very good likeness of our suspects.
Squadrons from RAF Marham have been involved with operations over Iraq, but to date, police have been reluctant to label this as a terrorist incident. They believe the assailants may have been spotted by other local drivers on the day of the attempted abduction, and they've appealed for help in tracing their movements. Meanwhile, this base, along with others across the UK, remains on heightened alert. While we look at these pictures, let me just a couple of other things I need to bring to you from the press conference. First of all, the victim still said to be very shaken. He's had a series of police interviews, and it's his evidence that have enabled these e-fits to be put together. This gentleman with the beard, he is the man who may now have facial injuries as a result of the serviceman fighting back. People are to look at these pictures, the police say. If they think they know who they are, dial 101. If they encounter them, do not approach them. Dial 999 straight away. This is the crucial message from police. They're not ruling anything out at the moment, but they still can't see any particularly strong motive for this other than a terrorism-related offence.
Robert, thank you. Now, oil paintings by Sir Winston Churchill are expected to fetch £800,000 at auction later today. The works by the former Prime Minister include the Giza Pyramids in Cairo and the Venetian Causeway in Miami Beach. They're amongst 500 works that he painted during his lifetime. Amy Cole has been to see them.
Politics and painting, 2 of Winston Churchill's great passions. After the challenge of leading Britain through the dark days of the Second World War, he was often found relaxing with a paintbrush in hand, then a very private hobby.
It's a great scene which has real depth and quality.
Now, 51 years after his death, the popularity of his work has grown. These two were painted in 1946 and, like many of his pictures, given away as gifts.
Yeah, so Churchill was known to giving his paintings as personal gifts to friends. The Miami picture he gave to Colonel Frank Clark, who Churchill had previously stayed with, and then he stayed with in his first extended holiday after World War II when he painted the picture. The Cairo picture he gave as a gift to Jan Smuts, who was Prime Minister of South Africa, and they had a very long friendship, and he actually gave him two paintings, one of which is actually lost, and this is the only one that remains.
The paintings are being sold through an auction house in Epping, where Churchill was once MP. The Miami painting is valued at up to £250,000. The one of the Giza pyramids is potentially worth even more, up to £600,000. But they could both go for much more than that. Their new owners will be able to hang not just a piece of art, but a piece of history on their wall. Amy Cole, BBC News.
Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Stav Danaos. Stav.
Hi Rita, thank you very much. It's been a bit of a soggy start to the morning. Southeastern areas being the longest, or the slowest I should say, to see that improvement. This is the picture from central London a couple of hours ago. You can see misty, murky conditions. Meanwhile, across the north, it's been really improving through the morning with skies like this across North Yorkshire, across many northern and central areas with the sunshine coming out. A little bit of patchy cloud here and there. And the satellite with radar shows it the best. You can see how it's slow to clear from the southeast. Eventually it will do. And notice all the brighter spells there showing the sunshine. But there will be a scattering of showers developing across the Midlands and in towards the southeast through the afternoon as the temperatures rise a little bit. Some of them could be on the sharp side. And again, across the north and west corner of Scotland here, we'll have a keen breeze blowing in thicker cloud, outbreaks of rain, some heavy bursts mixed in too. But by far the best of the weather across Scotland will be across eastern and southeastern areas, and not a bad looking afternoon for Northern Ireland too. But for England and Wales, generally a dry picture for the afternoon. Plenty of sunshine around, temperatures reaching 20 to 21 Celsius widely, the low 20s Celsius in the southeast, but still quite a humid feel to things. But watch out, some of those showers could be quite sharp. Now, those showers clear away into this evening. Most places will be dry overnight, apart from the northwest of Scotland. Again, seeing a breeze and outbreaks of rain. And then we look to the west. The next weather system, by the end of the night, brings some rain to Northern Ireland, just getting towards western parts of Britain. But there's your temperatures overnight, cool and fresher than what we saw last night, certainly for England and Wales. So for Thursday, for tomorrow morning, we start off on a bright note across many eastern parts. But then the rain across the west comes marching in, so a wet day for many. Much needed rain, though. If you didn't get enough rain for your garden today, tomorrow could be the one, certainly for England and Wales, with some heavy bursts of rain around, particularly central and eastern parts. But the far north of Scotland, and then later in the day, parts of Wales and the southwest of England seeing an improvement with the sunshine developing there. Now, that weather system slowly moves off into the near continent for Friday, and then we start to pick up a northwesterly wind. That sets the pressure pattern into the weekend, which I'll come on to in just a moment. But for Friday, the northern half of the UK probably seeing the best of any brightness. Central southern areas, that weak weather front slowly moving south, bringing some potentially heavy showers, and still the last day of the humid weather in the south, because as we head on towards the weekend, that cooler air, that northwesterly wind, begins to filter south right across the UK. So it means for the weekend then there'll be some sunshine around. It's not going to be a washout by any means. There will be a few showers around, mainly across northern and western areas, and it'll be a little bit fresher by day, but certainly by night you'll notice that difference as well. So cooling into the weekend.
Thank you, Stav. Now, a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. One of the men, 19-year-old Adel Kamish, who killed a Catholic priest, was tagged and on probation after twice trying to go to Syria. Well, that's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.